Welcome to The Space Between, a podcast about seeking and finding alignment. I'm your host, Josh Scott, and I'm grateful that you've joined me for another conversation. Welcome, everybody, to this edition of The Space Between. I'm your host, Josh Scott, and I'm here today with my friend Kent Dobson. Kent is a scholar, a former pastor, and he regularly leads tours of Israel, and he's also the editor of the NIV First Century Study Bible. And I would just add a really brilliant human being. So, Kent, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Kent has recently written a book that we're going to talk about called Bitten by a Camel, which is an absolutely fantastic title. I once was bitten by a donkey at a petting zoo. So there's, share
virtually the same thing.
Virtually the same thing. Actually, Kent, when I've been aware of you for a long time. I listened to Mars Hill podcasts when Rob was doing them back in the day, and heard some of your sermons, and was super intrigued. But I was on Twitter a few years ago, and somebody tweeted, Kent Dobson just did a Death of God talk at this conference called Christianity 21. So I immediately had to try to get a hold of the audio of that, and I did, and it was absolutely, first of all, it was comforting to me because I was having some of those same thoughts and questions, and so hearing somebody else talk about them was, in the way you did, was super powerful. But I'd like to begin with your journey, where it started for you in faith and in life. Your book begins on Mount Sinai, you searching for something on Mount Sinai. What led you to that point? What was your upbringing like in faith?
Oh, man. Well, my upbringing, I grew up in the South, well, in Virginia. Depends on what. For some people, it's not the South. But that's what it felt to me. And I grew up in Baptist fundamentalist Christianity. My dad worked for Jerry Falwell. So this was like the superstar culture of, well, it was fundamentalism before evangelicalism sort of took that over, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you were a part of, like, your upbringing, people who have been a part of the religious right, for example.
Yeah, I about said we started the religious right, more or less. My dad did, and Jerry Falwell did, and his people. So, the religious right, all of a sudden, American Christianity looked like voting. And that was a relatively new phenomenon. I mean, I don't remember even caring about this, but apparently after church, you could go in the back and, register to vote.
Wow.
So, yeah, and that's the world I grew up in. And it wasn't just that. It wasn't just politics, but it was, literalism, getting saved, worrying about hell. The afterlife is the main concern. The end times are approaching. That was the world that was the only world I knew as a kid.
You grew up with, my grandpa was a pastor, and he used to do these classes on Revelation, and we'd have charts and maps and where the Antichrist is coming from. Was that a thing for you too?
Oh yeah, big time. Russia this, barcodes this, nuclear war this. These giant grasshoppers in Revelation are really just Apache helicopters. All this kind of like craziness, man, craziness. But I mean, to their credit, they were taking the Bible seriously. They were reading it very poorly, in my view now, but they were certainly taking it seriously. And so we had maps and charts and all kinds of stuff. Yep.
Were you, like, I remember as a kid, I didn't sleep well because of, and I look back, I think it was because of church, because of Jesus was coming back at any moment, and he's going to be pissed. So it's not like meeting God would not be a good, and we were Free Baptists, so we were unsure about our salvation. You could lose it like a set of car keys. So, at least Southern Baptists had some sense of like, well, if you got it, you can't get rid of it even if you want to, right? So did that affect you at all? Did it affect your feeling of, just as a kid, I didn't feel, my parents had fantastic parents, but I didn't feel safe in some sort of existential way.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of kids experience that. I certainly did. I was afraid to go to sleep too, because what if I woke up, my parents weren't in the house, and the rapture had happened, and God had sucked up all the good people to the sky, and I was left on earth. Um, and the notion, what you were saying, like assurance of salvation, that was a bit iffy in the circles that I was in. Some people thought you could lose it, some people didn't, which just ramped up the little kid existential anxiety. Let's just call it anxiety, fear. It was a fear. Though people in word often said God loves you, the theology was absolutely terrifying. And yeah, I grew up very fearful as well.
Because there was no win. It was like you either believe the right things and make the right confession so you can meet Jesus, either at the rapture or when you die, or you don't. But either way, it seems like you're in trouble. Like meeting Jesus wasn't really a good thing.
Yeah. Or it might be good if you're special enough and have said the right prayers and really meant it. And also, too, I had an uncle who the family said was, quote, unsaved, So this was also a terrifying prospect. So I'm going to go to heaven when I die, and he's going to be down there in hell just being eternally tortured and burned alive because he wouldn't accept Jesus or he didn't say the right prayer. This was equally terrifying. Even if I was, quote, okay, my uncle was not. And that just was so, it caused a kind of psychic split. And really, I mean, I've been saying for a few years, the vision of God was rather schizophrenic. He's a terrible, awful tyrant who cannot love his enemies. He has to torture his enemies, and he's a mind police that's going to go through your mind. That's on the one hand, and the other side of the schizophrenic God is that Jesus is really friendly and he just loves children and he likes to pet lambs and he really loves you. So which is it? It's really hard as a kid. It's hard as an adult, but it's even harder as a kid.
There's a meme going around the internet where Jesus, we used to have this picture in our house, Jesus standing by the door knocking.
Yeah.
He says, "Let me in." Why? So I can save you from what I'm going to do to you if you don't let me in.
Yeah, exactly. Right? I want to be your friend, and if not, I'm going to kill you, torture you, burn you.
I've heard Richard Rohr talk about sort of the, it's an abusive relationship in a way. Yeah. That God exists in an abusive relationship.
Yeah, I actually put that as a sentence in my book, and several people have commented on it. Like, are you serious? Like, would you really call that? It is a kind of, it's God as like abuser in chief, really. And again, I don't look back on my childhood and my parents and my, the world that I came from and say it was all out of evil intent and they, no, it really wasn't. It's a failure of imagination. It's a failure of theology. It's a failure of worldview. But people were trying to do the best they could with the pretty poor information they had about their own religion, I think.
I went through a real period of time where I was angry.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I was leading a church and preaching regularly with all this sort of anger. Like, there's a whole world of scholarship and belief and ideas that I just was not opened up to, and so the more I would read people like Borg, for example, I'd be like, this has been here the whole time. Like, these questions that I've had, have been here the whole time, and nobody was like, hey, there's a book about that you should read.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how angry. I think I was more in denial. So there was certainly some anger there, but I didn't want to look at it because being angry God can be angry, but it's not the polite thing to do. So I think I probably just chose the path of I'm going to suppress this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I too experienced a lot of disappointment or buried anger when I realized the version of Christianity that I had been handed is just that. It's a version. It's one tiny, tiny offshoot of a massive oak tree that goes back for many centuries and looks very different in other parts of the world. You feel cheated. You're like, what? I thought we had the way, the truth, and life was our way, our truth, our life, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, because that's how it's sold to you. And I do think you're right. I do think it's a very genuine sort of belief people have that this is just it. This is Christianity. It's this.
mm-hmm.
And I can't tell you the number of people I talk to who would say they don't interpret the Bible.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I don't interpret. I just read it. Yeah, that happened all the time when I was a pastor, because we'd be wrestling with issues, really serious issues, LGBT stuff, and people would just often say, "Well, it's I just read it. I just accept what's right in front of me on this page." It's so funny to me.
Yeah, and just maddening to be in conversation with people and for them to think, well, you're interpreting it. I'm just telling you what it says.
Mm-hmm.
And not even the understanding that a translation is an interpretation.
Yeah.
I
But
just,
that's just part of it. That's actually not their fault either. I mean, in some respects, the Enlightenment set a trap. And the trap was, the truth is historically valid, scientifically valid, verifiable, literal, blah, 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 empirical. That was the trap. But the Bible doesn't play by those rules. So I honestly think people were like, well, I'm saying this is unconscious. This is the version of truth. It has to be empirically valid, and so forth and so on. So the Bible is true, therefore it must play by the same rules. It's actually a pretty noble attempt to try to make the Bible jump through the hoop of modernism. It just doesn't work very well. And it's also more nuanced than that, because every once in a while the Bible does say things that are historically valid, like, and Jesus went down to the Sea of Galilee. Well, there is a sea. Well, it's a lake in Galilee. Now, you could say, well, he didn't actually do it. I realize that, but it is valid in a lot of respects. We're talking about a real place where real events happen, even if the details aren't what we would call, every detail is not what we would call history. Anyway.
yeah, it's a failure of understanding.
Yeah.
You know, we understand genre when it comes to movies and other types of literature. We weren't given that same set of lenses with the Bible. And case in point, if we'd been given the opportunity to read the Bible differently, we wouldn't have a big ark in Kentucky.
That's right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we have a massive boat dedicated to proving the earth was made in 6 literal days.
I know. It's like heartfelt desire for the truth, really. It's just so misguided. It's like, oh man, yeah, it's like looking at a painting. Like, let's take like, what's the difference between Van Gogh's painting of sunflowers and a Wikipedia entry about how sunflowers grow and what they look like? I mean, the Bible is like a painting. It's like it's an image that's in dialogue with the human soul, mind, heart, values, but it's not a Wikipedia entry. It's
Right.
not. And that's just sad. It's so sad that someone would spend millions of dollars cutting down forests to make something that never existed in the first place. A giant exercise in missing the point. I feel bad for this person and for people who go there, really, who desire the truth in the same way I do. They want to say, what's really true in the world? What's true about God? What's true about the Bible? But the categories of that they're operating in have become so narrow. It's just a shame.
Yeah, and fundamentalist Christians and like militant atheists end up approaching the Bible the exact same way.
I know. Ricky Gervais is treating the Bible the same way, or Dawkins or all these other people, new atheists. They treat the Bible in the same way the fundamentalists do, which is so funny. It's like so funny.
They have tons of common ground. They just don't know it.
Yeah, totally.
And they reach different conclusions.
Yeah.
So as you're growing up in sort of this religious right tradition, what began to shift for you?
My musical tastes. I didn't like church music, and I started listening to rock and roll. I really think sometimes it's that simple. Like the slippery slope, whatever, don't listen to rock and roll, you're going to end up doing drugs, was true. But also, like, something in me felt what I had been handed feels too small.
Mm.
And there's something worth raging against, and that was like grunge music for me. And my parents